you don't land in an unknown farm field with wheels down. You leave them up and try to slide it in, and did that.
How far did it slide?
Slide?
Yeah, once you hit the ground, did it go like 100 yards, or was it stops right away?
No, it went at least 100 yards. I mean, I don't have a good measure of it, but it certainly went that far, because you were coming in there at about there's my bird gone.
Right.
At about 150 miles an hour.
Wow.
And you got to let it just lose speed.
I saw in that picture the propellers were all broken up. Huh?
Yeah.
So they were still spinning somehow.
And we made a very nice landing. It worked out ideally. I didn't have any problem. I didn't run into anything, and I didn't, with my feet up braced
right.
against the thing and so forth. Why, she just hit in there and slid like it was greased. And when it came to a stop, Willie and I ran it into the back, and we were afraid this thing was going to blow up, because there was still one engine that was firing and so forth. And of course, I turned them off long ago.
Did you dump the fuel? Do they have that? Where you can get rid of the fuel? Okay, it's on there. Huh?
It's too time consuming and too hard to do anything. We dumped the bombs and way up there, and that. And so we ran in the back and each grabbed a guy and dragged him out of the rear door and about 50 feet away, and then ran back in and did it again, and then we won one more guy, because there were 5 of them that we had to drag out. And and as we dragged the 5th one out, I hear this airplane, and look up, and I see this fighter still there, and he makes a big circle around and starts in right towards where we were, and I yelled at Willie to duck down in the wheat. The wheat was about 3 feet high or something, and if you lay down in it, it'd be harder for him to see it. And I thought this guy was coming in to strafe us. But just as he straightened out back there, why, his engine started to cough, and I knew at that point that he was running out of gas, and because he'd still been shooting at us, and he was the only one left out of the 5 there, and he came in and was going to try to land alongside of where we had landed, and did, in fact, land with the wheels up. And in front of where he landed, there was a barn, and of course he comes in a lot faster than we did in the bomber. And
what kind of plane was that? Like a Spitfire or something? Or?
It was a Focke-Wulf 190 fighter, and he slid it in pretty nicely, but it overshot and went into this barn, and nothing else happened in that regard. And then,
did he survive?
Yeah. Well, let me go on a little bit. So then about 7 of the German Home Guard guys, they were real old guys, but they got rifles and uniforms and stuff, came hustling over across this field, and made us put up our hands, and we certainly did, and they came up and searched us to make sure we didn't have any guns or whatever, and so on. And then I tried to, none of them spoke much English, but I tried to tell them that we needed a doctor, that all these guys were wounded and so forth, and we went, they let us go back and start we put tourniquets on some of them, and we put bandages, and we gave some of them shots of morphine and stuff like that that we were trained to do. And they sent somebody to find a doctor, and then I don't remember the exact sequence, but anyhow, I tried to tell him that this fighter went into the barn and it might catch fire, and the pilot was in it, and he sent a couple of the guys in to see what happened and so forth, and we were very busy still trying to help the wounded guys, but in a short time, why, these two came out kind of holding up the fighter a little bit, and he had knocked himself out when he hit into the barn and broken his nose and knocked out his front teeth and a few things like that, but nothing that was, going to kill him or anything like that. And he came over with some of the guards and so forth, and came up to us and said, like, for you the war is over.
Oh, really?
And yeah. And then a doctor arrived, and he started taking over what we were doing with there, and then he told the soldiers to go down. There was a school down a road a little ways, a little country road, and to get some wagons, I think is what he told them. But anyhow, and I don't know how, because we kept working on this, and how much time elapsed, I don't know exactly. But at any rate, pretty soon the wagon come up with some of these guards, and there were several nuns, and the wagon had some hay thrown in it, in the bottom of it, and they came up there, and then they all helped, including us, to load our wounded in this wagon, lying down and so on. And then I can't remember at one point there was a German major showed up and could speak some English or an amount of English or something, and that made it easier for us to.
And couldn't you speak German? I thought you knew some German.
I know.
Not enough?
I just know a few words.
Okay. So they took you. Where'd they take you then?
Well, we went down with this wagons down to the bottom of the hill where there was a school, and we left the wagons and stuff there, and the guards lifted the wounded out, and they took them in the school, and the nuns were going to take care of them, and the doctor was there with them and so forth. So they were had enough attention and so on. And
those guys all survived, right?
No, one died and 4 survived. One of them was hit twice in the chest or stomach or something like that, very seriously, and he.
But 4 of them survived, so it was good you crash landed the plane.
The other 4, that they eventually took to hospitals and took care of them and so forth and so on, and they survived. Okay. And this German major and some of the guards then took us to a village right near there, and there was a small there was a building that had a little jail inside the basement, and they took us down there and locked us up in the jail. And the major said that in the morning he would call, and in the morning a truck would come to pick us up to take us to a prisoner interrogation place or something. And then during the nighttime, they picked up the navigator, the bombardier, and the engineer, and brought them to this village, and brought them down into the jail place. And the next morning, they gave us some bread and.
Did they bomb you that night? Americans?
Not there.
Okay.
The next morning, a truck with some regular Luftwaffe guards showed up, and they put us in the back of the truck with, I don't know, there was 2 guys driving it and 3 guards in the back with us. And we went through one town, and people started throwing rocks at us and spitting at us and yelling, because they'd been bombed, and you couldn't hardly blame them. But on the other hand, the guards immediately indicated to us to lie down in the bottom of the truck so they couldn't see us, and then they didn't know what was in the truck. And, so we got out of there, and this truck drove us to Frankfurt, Germany. And by the time that I don't remember how the time passed, but by the time we got there, it was late in the afternoon, and was just ready to start getting dark. And they took us into a railroad station in Frankfurt, and they took us up. It was either the 2nd or 3rd floor, but it was the top floor in the station there, and they locked us in some room there to stay for the night, and then they were going to take us someplace else in the morning. And during that night, some part of the RAF came over and was bombing the rail. What do you call it?
Depot or whatever, the station.
Well, they weren't trying to hit the depot. They were trying to tear up the
tracks.
The tracks.
Right.
And
so it was kind of scary. You were getting bombed.
It scared the
devil
out of us, because we're here. Fortunately, the building didn't get hit, and we didn't really suffer anything except a little fright. And then the next morning, they had a little, I don't know what, a narrow gauge train. It's smaller than a full size thing. It's like sort of like a trolley, and they put us on there with a bunch of guards, and this thing went outside of the town of Frankfurt. I'm just guessing 20 miles or something. And there was an interrogation place which had the name of Dulag Luft 2. And we were taken into there. And
that's where they asked you for your name, rank, and serial number?
Yeah.
Where are those dog tags? So you had your dog tags. They probably looked at that, right? That says who you are, anyway.
Yeah, the U.S. dog tag is this little thing that has your name, and
so was the interrogation? What could they get out of you? You didn't
really not much of anything. They knew more about, when they were asking questions. They knew more about what they were asking about than we knew, actually. And it wasn't severe. I mean, we weren't beaten or anything, or or threatened.
So they just asked you a bunch of questions about who you were and where you came from.
You know, what group and so forth and so on, and like you say, I can't tell you or something like that. Well, we really know. But anyhow.
So then after the interrogation?
And after the interrogation, well, they did it to us for 3 or 4 or 5 days.
Okay.
They put us back in cells again,
Mm-hmm.
and so on. And finally they announced that they were going to send us then off to a German prisoner of war camp run particularly by the Luftwaffe for Air Force officers. The name of it is Stalug Luft 3.
Right.
And I think I'll stop there for a minute.
All right. Now they just informed you you're going off to your new home at Stalug Luft 3, which is actually pretty famous. That's where the Great Escape took place, right?
Yes.
Same prison camp.
Yes, it is. When they had finished the interrogation, they took us into the middle of Frankfurt to the train station, and there they had a freight train with empty boxcars, and they had collected, I don't have any idea, 30 or 40 prisoners, or maybe more, I don't know.
They're all Air Force?
Yeah,
okay.
Because this was strictly the Luftwaffe,
right.
The German Air Force operation. And anyhow, they locked us up in a boxcar, and the train took off at night. They didn't drive the trains in the daytime because the fighters would come over and try to shoot them up. And I think we went 2 nights. We were going up in a northerly direction to about 90 miles southwest of Berlin to the Luftwaffe prisoner of war camp just for officers, Stalag Luft 3.
When you say just for officers, is that they treat you better there, or what's the distinction?
They treated you better there, yes.
And the enlisted men that they would capture?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that because they wanted to use you at the end of the war to trade, or what?
No, they were signers of the Geneva Convention, which was made up after the end of World War I and signed by some 120-odd countries. And it described the type of treatment that everybody was supposed to get. And of course, the Germans are very rank conscious and so on. And so they, if you're a lieutenant or a captain or a major or something like that, they
respected that.
They respect that, and they treat you better than if you were a private or a corporal or a sergeant.
Well, was everybody in your crew going to this camp, or did they get split up?
No, they got split up. The enlisted men, of course, in my case, all 5 of them ended up in a hospital someplace because they were all shot.
Right.
No, the engineer, I don't know, they took him someplace else.
Okay. Because he was an enlisted man, he wasn't an officer like you.
So the navigator, the bombardier, and the co-pilot and I were put in with a whole bunch of other officers from other planes and took a 2-night train trip up outside of a little town called Sagan, either Z-A-G-A-N or S-A-G-A-N. It's right near the Polish border, and in fact, I think now is part of Poland after the end of the war.
That's where the camp was.
That's where the camp was. It was outside of that town in a woods.
And you have a drawing. There's
Uh-huh.
basically cabins and a couple towers and a bunch of barbed wire.
Right.
Right. You drew in your wartime log what it looked like from the outside.
The samples that I did show. It was much more extensive than this picture where I have the front of Stalug Luft 3 camp. It was there were probably maybe 30 or 40 of these cabins.
Okay.
I only show here like 3 here and 1 there. I mean, on a relatively small picture, you couldn't show all of them. In that respect, this other dog tag that I have here, when the train pulled in to the town, they took us off in trucks and took us out to the entranceway to the camp, and they took pictures of us, ID pictures that they put on their records and so forth. They gave each one of us a German dog tag for this camp, and mine here says Stalug Luft 3, and the number on it is 2052. In other words, I was the 2052 officer that came into this camp, and in there were a lot of British, Royal Air Force captives, some Canadian Air Force, and of course mainly United States Army Air Corps people. So after they had processed us and we were marching up to the front of the camp, lo and behold, standing in the whole group there, yelling and screaming and waving, were my original co-pilot, navigator, and bombardier, who had been shot down on their first mission without me, and they had each been wounded in the shoot down, and fortunately lived through it. The co-pilot lost his right eye and had shrapnel wounds over a large part of his body. His name was Arthur Bushnell. Robert Barton was the navigator, and he had been shot through, I believe it was his right leg, I can't remember for sure which leg, and the whole, what do they call the muscle that comes down in the
Achilles tendon?
The Achilles tendon was shot through in such a way that it, at that point, was not reattached, and he had to use one crutch.
Mm-hmm.
And the bombardier had been hit in the thigh, a pretty good crack, but it missed the bone and so forth.
And then you ended up rooming with these guys for quite a while, right?
And
you have drawings of the inside of your cabin there, and from the one end and then the other end where you had one of the bottom bunks. It's actually labeled, right?
Yes.
And so you were reunited with these guys that you spent 6 months training with.
Right.
And they became your roommates.
And there was
for a while.
There was 1, 2.
Looked like at least 8 guys in a bunk, something like that. Right?
3, 4. There were 4 double
bunk
beds. So that took care of 8 guys, and then eventually, over time, they came in and made an additional one up on each one.
Oh, so 3.
So that they could add more guys into
And there's no electricity, right? And you just had like a stove for heat.
A stove for heat, and you could heat a little water on the top of it. There was a kind of a cooking room separate from this, where they gave enough coal to make a little fire that you could heat up some of your food. There was no running water, no showers. To go in a shower, you had to sign up and wait like a month or 6 weeks or something like that for your name to come up to go to.
Now, I scanned in one of the pages from the Red Cross packet that was sent to you. So the Red Cross actually was able to send you stuff, right? Like food and
they sent it through the Red Cross of Switzerland that had access to the camp, and they could examine it to see if it was being run properly in accordance with the Geneva Convention and so forth. Unfortunately, we never got enough. It was supposed to be one box for one prisoner for a week, and we only got a half a box. So the food was short. The stuff we got from the Germans was, they made up some kind of soup, but there was nothing of much value in it. And
so I noticed in your wartime log you continued writing about food quite a bit. That seemed to be
that was.
How much weight? You lost a lot of weight when you were there.
I think when I went in there, I weighed about 170, and when I came out and got home, I weighed 115.
Wow.
Now, I did start to put that on as soon as I started to get some good food and so forth. I mean, but I wasn't terribly emaciated, but I was.
And it wasn't the Germans. The Germans didn't have food either, right? Nobody.
No, that was the problem. Was that they were short of food as well, and so they weren't giving us as much as they did their own people, but their own people were getting less food than they would like, and so you could. The Red Cross furnished an awful lot of different things, but not food.
Is that where you got cigarettes, though, from the Red Cross?
No, the cigarettes had a different route. The Germans would allow the American cigarette companies to send a certain size box that contained, I think it was 3 cartons of cigarettes I forget now. Every 3 months or something like that, they could send this 3-carton box, which my parents could purchase in the U.S. They would send the money to some place where they would to the cigarette company, and they then would ship these things over through the Swiss Red Cross, and it get delivered to you. And of course, the cigarettes were very valuable for trading with the German guards and so forth. I mean, you could trade them some cigarettes and get something in return that you wanted. And they were very inexpensive at that point because there was no taxes on them.
Sure.
My memory of it was.
I saw you had a lot of cigarette. You were saving different types of cigarette.
Yeah,
packs.
There's
a lot of money.
They did the same thing through Britain and Canada and France, a whole bunch of different.
So you started collecting all the strange cigarette packs, right?
Yeah.
Just as a diversion, I guess. So what was a typical day like in prisoner of war camp? Was it boring, or was it?
Pretty boring, but
I guess people played some sports to keep in shape, right? They had.
And well, they had a walk that went around the outside. The camps were divided up into what they call compounds.
Right.
And the compounds were built right adjacent to one another. But what the idea of the compound was that if the prisoners started to riot,
Right. They'd be contained to a
they'd be
compound.
contained in some compound, a smaller number. I think the number in a compound was limited to like 1,000, so that the whole camp couldn't
Right.
start a revolution or something. At any rate, around inside that compound, they had a little fence that was about 1.5 feet high, and it was like 20 feet from all of the barbed wire fences. If you stepped over into there, these guys in the goon boxes
Mm-hmm.
with the rifles and machine gun would shoot you. And they did a few times. So that kept you 20 feet from the thing. But then inside of that, they had a walk, you could walk around
Okay, people would do that for exercise.
for exercise whenever the weather was decent.
What you're saying about these guys shooting, that reminds me, you said one time they posted a sign not to cheer for the planes. They posted it in German. And some guys cheered and they shot them.
They shot at them, yeah.
Or they shot at them while they were cheering.
Yeah.
They didn't kill them. They shot at the ground.
I think like one guy was wounded or something. They weren't trying to kill him, but they were so damn mad at our cheering. This was down near Moosburg, near Munich, and they made us dig. What do you call them? Trenches down there for in case there was an attack on the camp. The bombs were dropped. You were supposed to go into these trenches,
Okay.
which were about, I don't know, 8 feet deep,
Mm-hmm.
and they slanted down at the two ends, and they were about this wide. And when this happened one time, some planes came right over us. Not to bomb us there, they were bombing someplace else, and we all started to cheer for the planes, and then they started firing, and everybody ran for the trenches, and the poor guys that dove into that thing first
You get smushed.
get smushed. They piled up until they were higher than that thing. Fortunately, nobody got killed in it, but
Also, the camp you were at had the Great Escape, and they dug a tunnel and got out.
that's true.
Tell me, you weren't real interested in escaping because it was the middle of Germany, right? You thought that was pretty. It was the English guys that really wanted.
Well, the English guys mostly had been in there for a much longer period of time. They also, quite a few of them spoke quite good German and so on. And they didn't have too far to go. If they could get to the channel and get some fishing boat or something, why they could get home. And there was no way that we could get home. So, but there were escaped guys and there were non-escaped guys, I guess you'd have to say. The reason that so many of them, that they were all British though, was that they reorganized the camp, and they had mixtures of British and when I arrived there, British and U.S. guys. They didn't differentiate. They just put you in one of these compounds, and they started this tunnel from this one compound to. It was all sandy soil, so it was easy to dig in. So it went down under one of the housing units, and then out under the fencing, and under the road out in the front, over to where it was kind of woodsy, and that's where the end came up. Just a little bit. It took I don't know, a year, I think,
To dig the tunnel.
to build this tunnel. And about a month before it was far enough along that they were ready to break out of it, for some reason that it had nothing to do with, they didn't know, the Germans didn't know what was happening, but they decided they were going to separate groups into nationalities. So they took all the Americans that were in this particular compound. I wasn't in that compound, but they took all of them out and put them over in another compound.
Okay.
And they took the British that were over here and put them in there. So this ended up as an all-British compound, and the Americans were...
So the one with the tunnel was where all the British...
Now the tunnel is there, and it's all British.
Yep.
They broke it open one night. They got out, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was something on the order of 120 or somewhere like that, out of this thing, before somebody discovered it. They had these searchlights that up in these, we call them goon boxes. There were towers
Yep.
up with a couple of guys up there with machine guns and rifles and stuff, and great big searchlights at night with which they could swing around and look at the ground and everything. And as these guys were going out, somebody saw one of them with a searchlight, and they rang an alarm and told somebody to go over there and look from the outside. And so the 120 got out.
Now, did they move you from that camp later on when I think Patton was coming in, right? So they had to move you?
In January of 1945, I was in that camp from about the end of August or 1st of September, when I was shot down August the 12th. From that time, 43, 44, to January of 45. And at that time, the U.S. and Russia were winning the war, and the U.S. was coming from down in France and up this way, and the Russians were coming from the east, approaching. And we could hear the planes were starting to fly over the camp, both not very much Russian, but German fighters and stuff. And we could hear the guns off in the distance. I don't know how far they were away, 20 miles away or something like that. And we heard a number of rumors. One of them was that Hitler said if they came close, their Gestapo was to kill all of the prisoners. And the guy that was a colonel that ran it, a German colonel, he warned our top guy about that, because he didn't want any part of being responsible for having... At that time, I think we had, I don't know, 10 or 12,000 officers in that camp. And so anyhow, this one Sunday night, like at 9 o'clock at night, they come into each barracks and they said, "We're going to march you out of here. You got 1 hour to select what you're going to take with you, and then you got to march." And we did. And mainly you got on as much clothes as you could wear, you know.
Because it was cold, it was winter.
It was cold, right.
Now you had to go through the snow and stuff, right? They were marching you deeper into Germany.
Yeah.
You
No, we were marching sort of south, but
really?
yeah.
You lost that book, right? The wartime log. You brought it with you, but you lost it, right?
Right.
And some guy picked it up.
And some of the guys had something that were little sleds that they
Dragged
put
their
together,
stuff on. Yeah.
and they put the stuff on this thing and then just pull it, you know, with a rope. And I lost this thing when I sat down sometime, and about, I don't know, 2 or 3 days later, these guys came along with the sled thing and so forth, and they said, "Are you Heller?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "We found your wartime log," and they returned it to me. That's how I have
So
it.
they picked it up and threw it on the sled and brought it.
Right. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Now you also, it was so cold, you didn't have good boots or shoes or something?
I can't remember what they were not.
You got like frostbite on your toes or whatever, right?
Yeah, they were old stuff that was been captured.
Okay.
And weren't very good, and it was extremely cold, and we were marching at night, and then they would huddle us up in old factories or barns or whatever during the daytime, because if we started marching down the roads in the daytime, the Americans were liable to strafe them, thinking we were German on there, just like they had to hide their trains and tunnels and stuff in the daytime.
So how many days did you have to march?
I don't remember the exact. It was about something like 15 or so.
Okay, so that's
We walked a long way south, and finally they were able to get some boxcars that in World War I they used to call them 40 and 8. They were for like 40 people and 8 horses or something. I don't know. Anyhow, in this little town, they found a bunch of these, and they put us in them, and then wired the doors shut so that there was no way to get out. And I mean, we were just jammed in there. There wasn't enough room to lie down on the floor or anything.
And they took you to another camp?
And they hooked us on some train and took us from pretty well up north down to a little town called Mooseburg, which is about 15 or 20 miles out of, the big town down
Munich?
there. Munich.
Right.
Out of Munich. I'm told now that it's almost, Munich has grown to where
Part of the suburb?
it's part of just the suburb of.
So you took it to that camp. Was that your last stop before you got freed?
Yep, they didn't have enough room. In this camp, they had over 110,000 prisoners of all different varieties.
Wow, it's huge, huh?
Yeah. They had Indians and South Americans and Italians and French and, of course, English. And
Was it still officers or was it everybody?
no, it was everybody.
Okay.
They're just.
So they just brought everybody there, and then Patton finally came through and freed you?
And there again, you could sign up for a shower, and I signed up. My recollection is it was a Saturday morning, but I'm not sure that it was. It was around sometime in April, I think. Anyhow, in the morning I went down with a group of 50 down to the shower room, which was right near the front gate. And we go in there, and you take off your clothes. There's one kind of room along the side. You take off your clothes there and hang them on a hook, and then you go into the shower room and they turn the water on, and we're taking a shower, and all of a sudden there's some boom crashes going on, and a shell goes through the roof and tiles coming down and everything, and the first thing we did was flop down on the floor because there were windows up, that high. Get down underneath, and then somebody gets up and takes a peek out the thing, and the road runs right down there. And they said, "Are there German tanks coming down the road there with a bunch of doughboys running alongside them?" And they're all firing up at the
German tanks or
up.
American tanks?
American tanks.
Yeah, American.
Did I say German?
You said German, yeah.
Oh, no,
American tanks.
American tanks coming down this road, and all these foot soldiers running, staying on the other side and firing over the top, and the tank every once in a while letting loose with their great big cannon, but they kept it up in the air pretty much. And so we squiggled across the floor, staying down low, into the dressing room area, and grabbed our clothes and started putting them on and not standing up, because every once in a while a bullet or something would come flying through, and we got our clothes back on. And of course, this was like I say, towards the latter part of April or something, and it wasn't that cold or anything. And the German guards were guys that were old guys for the most part, or that had been wounded, and they didn't want any part of it. And they're coming in and they're handing over their rifles and so forth. Well, there was a stairwell that went down, and all the boilers were down in a basement below this thing. So we tell them, go down there and hide down the stairs, which they did very readily. And these tanks are coming down, and more, and right outside is where the big gate is, with all barbed wire on it and everything like that. And all of a sudden, one of the tanks makes a left-hand turn right at the gate.
This goes right through?
And it goes right through the thing and tears the whole thing down and into the compound. Well,
people
then
just cheering?
Everybody came running out of there, cheering like mad, and the guy had to stop the tank because he was afraid he was going to run over somebody. This great big thing, and he can't see that well out the front, and some of the guys began climbing on the tank, and he couldn't see anything, so he has to stop. But there wasn't any resistance there. Now there was an SS artillery thing that was down below us about 2 miles or 3 miles, and they were firing shells over the top of the camp at the roadway where these tanks were coming down, and the tanks were firing back. Wow. And that continued for a whole day there. But the Germans knew we were a prison camp there with all these prisoners in it, and the U.S. knew. They had information all about this, and so they were being very careful not to. And I think it was somewhere between 7 and 10 people that got killed in the process, out of 100 and some thousand. So
then they came through, and then they freed you, I guess, and then they had to somehow get you back to America.
Well, then we had to stay. They didn't have any way but
transport you.
to transporting us out of there. So they said, well, they sent in some bakery units to start making us some food. And they said, you'll have to wait there. The nearest airfield had been bombed by our guys, and they had to fix up the airfield of the runways and so forth. Yeah. And Churchill had said a long time ago about the RAF and about the U.S. Air Force that when it was over, he would see that all of those prisoners were flown out of there. In other words, give them priority to get all these planes in there and take Air Force prisoners out. So I don't remember, but it was about a week that we were hanging around, and they were working on the airfield and so forth, and the food supplies were very short at that time because the U.S. people didn't have enough to give away. I remember we went out, and we could go out now, and we wandered around in the fields, and there was some guys that did telephone lines or something, and the only thing they could give us, they gave us one big box of oatmeal.
Okay. And
we took it home, and we put water in it and heated it up. And
so then they flew you to England, and then from England you got on that boat?
They flew us from Germany to France near the coast,
Okay.
and they kept us there for about a week or so to refix our eating, because a couple of guys got killed eating too much trying to. And then this was called Camp Lucky Strike, and from there they took us to Le Havre Harbor, where they had a boat. There's a picture of the boat in this material. The SS Lejeune loaded us on there. It went over to England and stopped at Southampton and picked up 4,000 American nurses, and which they gave all the upper decks to, and we were down below the waterline. And then it took off in a convoy to go across the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
We were out about 2 or 3 days, and they decided that all the Germans knew that the war was over for as far as Germany was concerned. So they said any boat that could make 20 knots or better could leave the convoy and go straight, which our boat did. It arrived in New York. I think the total time was maybe 10 days, or I don't remember exactly. They took us from there to Camp Kilmer in New Jersey, right nearby. Kept us for about 2 days and got us cleaned up and some clothes, and saw that there, and then gave us a leave of absence of I can't remember. I think it was 2 months.
Now, I saw you calculated how much they owed you from all your time in prison camp.
Yeah,
So that was a whopping, it was like $3,500.
About $3,500 or something like that.
Now, you went and then proposed to Mom, right, and got married during that leave.
And I'd been in correspondence with her, of course, all the time in the prison camp, and after I got home, we got together, and
that's why you look kind of slim in those wedding pictures.
Yeah, if you see, I look kind of gaunt.
Yeah.
And anyhow, I proposed to her, and she accepted that she would marry me, and we got married on the 1st of August, which at that time was Army Air Corps Day.
And also the war was still on.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you had your honeymoon in Miami?
I had to report to down in Miami
Right.
for examination and so forth, and then reassignment. And so that became our honeymoon.
So even though you were in the war that long in prison camp, they were still going to send you to the South Pacific to continue fighting.
When I got there, they were talking, and they said it would be their intention to retrain me to fly B-29s, which are much bigger plane that they're using out in the Pacific, and then I would be available to the Air Force to go out there. Very fortunately, I don't remember the exact dates, but this was on early August. They dropped the first atom bomb on Japan, and then they dropped the second one a couple of days later, and the Japanese said, "We surrender." And after they announced that they had surrendered, then our Air Force decided they wouldn't need us if we didn't want to stay in. And so they said, another option is that you can retire and go on about your own business and so forth. And Ruthie and I talked it over, and we decided that
Got enough.
we'd get out of there. And then as soon as I got, they sent me up to I can't remember what the name of it is, but it was near Chicago,
right,
to get discharged. And from there we went to Ann Arbor, and I went in and enrolled to go to the University of Michigan Business School.
Right, and they had a GI Bill, which helped pay for that.
They had a GI Bill, which was very helpful, and so on. And that pretty much was the end of my experiences with the United States Air Force. And prisoner things and stuff like that. I'm very happy that I got out of it and have enjoyed my life
Barely even got a scratch, huh?
without just some very minor scratches. And so I hope that maybe some people who get a chance to look at this thing or something will get some kind of understanding and enjoyment out of it perhaps. And if anybody ever has any questions that they want to ask, why, I'll be happy to try to answer them as best I can. Thank you very much for your attention. And thank Tom.
We're very proud of you, Dale.
And Dale Darling and Bob Heller for all of their help in preparing this resume of my career in the Air Force. So,
Happy New Year, Pop.
same to you, Tom.
Friends, this is a very heavy moment, but an occasion of remembrance. For this year's presentation, I'd like to introduce former First Lieutenant Robert Heller, who in 1943 was one of the early replacement crews to enter Bassingbourn. His faithful day on 12 August 1943, he left the runways of Bassingbourn with his crew and never returned back to Bassingbourn. Unfortunately, they were shot down by enemy flak, and he spent some 8 months as a Kriegi in a German prisoner of war camp. 21 months. But he's here today and pleased and honored to have the opportunity to place this beautiful wreath at our stone plinth memorial. Lieutenant Heller, welcome back.